Hello and welcome to the Halfie Project podcast. My name is Becky. Sitting next to me is Cedric, Sky, City, Smooth, Talking Stout. And we're here at the Halfie Project podcast. So Smooth, what were you going to say?
I don't know. I was just going to say something dumb. So it's good that I didn't say anything.
Oh, well.
I had nothing really.
Oh. What a smooth talker. Yeah, so we're here at the podcast once again. And today we are continuing this discussion. Like last episode, we were talking about suicide in Korea. And we're continuing this discussion on, I guess this encompasses under mental health, right? Mental health umbrella.
I think so, for sure.
And we're having another episode furthering the talk about mental health, in this case, maybe even spiritual and emotional health. And today's topic is going to be something that's very unfamiliar, I believe, to Western audiences.
Right.
And the term that we are going to discuss is Han.
Han.
Han. So you might say in HAN, using the Korean or the American alphabet, or just like Han, if you know how to read 한자, 한국, 한자. It's spelled the same Han, but the meaning is totally different.
Right.
So we're going to delve into what is this Han concept and what does it mean to the modern Korean person. And I think it can extend even beyond just an individual level, but even into the geopolitical atmosphere. How do other countries relate to Korea? Why does Korea make certain political movements and societies and how people interact with each other in relationships? So I believe understanding this underlying concept of Han will hopefully shed some light in understanding how Koreans interact, even on an individual and grander scale.
Yeah, this is going to be super interesting because I didn't realize that I understood this concept of Han prior to the show. I think I didn't know that it was termed
Like it had
Han.
a word, right?
Right,
Yeah.
right. But I'd heard about it here and there, I think growing up, but more so in my adult years, here and there, I've come across this concept in Korean culture. And so looking into it, it was very fascinating because it's almost like you're playing the role of, I don't know, a sociologist or a psychologist, when you're looking at individuals or even societies. And so in the context of Korea, it's just like, wow, so this makes sense why Korea did this or why this individual Korean reacted that way.
Yeah.
So it's super interesting. And some of it is kind of speculation, but it really makes sense when you think about it.
Sure. I don't know if speculation is quite the right word, but I think I get what you mean, as in there's no origin point you can nail down.
Yeah.
You can't really give any statistics on this. It's
No.
more like a cultural identity factor.
Right.
Right? Yeah, it's almost anthropologic.
Yeah,
Anthropology.
I'm sure there's a word in the sciences in the medical field for this concept.
For Han.
Yeah, there has to be.
I don't know if there is, honestly. Because
Not directly translated, but like just
like something-
what Han represents and what it means. Yeah, I feel like there's
Yeah.
got to be a term for it.
Han is, I guess we should let people know now first what
Like,
Han
what is
is. Kind of to explain a little bit of Han. So it's actually very difficult to define. There is no single term in English, at least, and maybe it will exist in some other languages, but at least in English, there's no single term to describe Han. And even if you ask Koreans, because I watched this video where they're doing street interviews and asking people on the street, what is Han? What is Han? Can you describe Han? It was very difficult for people to put it into words. And I think it's because it's such an intrinsically gut emotion feeling that's why it's difficult to express it in just cold, plain dictionary words.
Yeah.
So the closest that I could find for Han, and this is kind of a combination from different sources, it's like internalized deep sorrow, grief, resentment. It's a grudge. It's self-pity. It's kind of somewhere in the Korean psyche, this sense that some injustice has been done against me and I am helpless to do anything about it. And so it's that feeling of just anger, sadness, frustration, bitterness, all of those emotions wrapped up. It's like that gut twisting, gut wrenching feeling
Right.
that you get when the small person has been stepped on. There's nothing you can do.
Yeah.
It's kind of all of those things together.
Wow, I think you hit it right on the head there. Yeah, I felt that as you were describing it because I'm trying to relate myself, having grown up in America most of my life. If I know what this feeling is, and I feel like in some ways I do, but in other ways, the way that a Korean would experience it here, I don't think I know the depth of the feeling.
Right. I think it's very I don't want to discount other nations or people groups' intense difficulty or sorrows in their history, but I feel Han is very peculiar to Korea and their national identity.
Yeah.
It's sort of a response to Korea's history of incredible suffering and oppression. Because Korea has faced repeated invasions, Japanese occupation, so many horrific things were done to Korean people over this long period of time. And then we had, of course, the Korean War. And today, still, the deepest root of Han that I believe exists in the modern Korean is because of the separation of North and South Korea. This division of families. You can't even reach out, say your grandparent is on the other side of the border.
Oh, man.
You cannot even call them. That simple act of calling somebody whom you love and is your family, you cannot do that because some injustice has been inflicted on a grander scale and you are too small to do anything. But you live with that burden, that guilt, and that sorrow and separation every single day.
Right.
So whether it's, explicit in people's actions and thoughts, it is sort of this rooted sense, I believe, that Koreans carry. And it has, over time, kind of morphed into a national identity, right? A collective sense of this sorrow,
Yeah.
right? And so we see this existing in the arts, I would say primarily. Of course, in politics and the way people act on a social scale, but you'll see Han, the expressions of Han in like music or books or poetry, dramas,
Right.
right? So like in the 1970s, the movie Love Story?
Yeah, I've heard about it. I've never seen it.
So Love Story it's an English or American film.
Right.
I watched it. I remember watching it and I remember crying as I was watching it, but I was quite young when I first see it. So I think if I saw it again, I might respond differently.
Yeah.
But typically, like Hollywood films, for example, will not do so well in Korea. They're so like happy ending. There's this glittery, sham to Hollywood happy endings.
Happily ever after.
Right. That
all the time.
didn't translate quite well. But Love Story in 1970s was a surprise hit in Korea because of the tragic, sad ending. And there's nothing you can do. Oh, sorry. Spoiler alert, guys. If you don't know Love Story.
I mean, yeah, you've had like 40, 50 years to watch it.
Hey,
so.
then it's your fault. It's not our fault. So Han, you can see it is revealed in a lot of artistic expressions in Korea.
Yeah, I mean, you have different like traditional songs that relate to Han or manifest itself, I guess, as a result of Han. You have what's known as pansori.
판소리. Yeah.
Pansori is sort of this theatrical singing / musical performance that takes a very long time to actually get through. Usually the performances are anywhere from a couple of hours to like 8-9 hours.
Wow.
Yeah, you didn't know that?
No, I didn't know it was that long.
It's so long. Like I don't think I could sit through it.
Wow.
And so you will have like a performer, for example, who is dressed in traditional clothes because it's totally traditional,
Yeah.
and they're like singing in a certain style, in a certain way, and a lot of the messaging in the story is rooted out of pain and sorrow.
Right.
And then you also have an accompaniment musician, usually it's a traditional Korean drum, and this is just a total performance, and you'll have other characters at play, of course, but that was something that a lot of people say, well, this is definitely an expression of Han because they're singing about their pain, they're singing about some of the injustices that has happened. to them.
Yeah, and the thing that's a very defining factor of pansori is it's not honestly beautifully sung. It's not
Yeah.
melodious. You know, the singer's voice itself is trained to be rough. It's trained to express strong, deep emotions. So to the untrained ear, someone who's hearing it for the first time, it might almost sound like shouting at some points.
Yeah.
And it's pansori. So I was reading up on pansori. Apparently, like a long time ago, pansori was actually more joyful. Like it would have happy endings.
Right.
But then I believe it was maybe like, I guess it would have been during the Japanese occupation, especially, where it started to evolve
Okay.
into something more of tragic tellings of these stories because people were living in intense poverty, people were living under oppression. And so, like I had mentioned, Han, another example of Han is a sense of injustice. So you would have people who were living in poverty telling their tales of woe and sorrow through song. This was something that was developed out of their poverty and oppression.
Right.
So pansori, though, is, yes, very traditional. It's linked primarily, now the pansori we know, to this sense of oppression. Isn't it funny how these musical expressions come out of oppression?
I was just thinking that. Of course,
Yeah.
it sounds very familiar to what we spoke about a couple of episodes ago. But
Yes.
yeah, it's just a way to manifest the internal sorrow, resentment, the struggle, all of that into an artistic or musical form.
Yeah. It's very intense in Korea. I wanted to pull up some lyrics because, you know, you mentioned traditional songs. So what is one of the most famous traditional songs in Korea? Oh, you sound great. Yeah.
Thanks.
So I pulled up the lyrics and they're so short and brief. And actually, nobody knows the origin of arirang, but arirang is very traditional and like a heart of Korea song. It's not our national anthem, but
Right.
honestly, it could be.
Yeah.
So the tune is 아리랑 아리랑 아라리요 아리랑 고개로 넘어간다 나를 버리고 가시는 님은 심리도 못 가서 발병 난다. So pretty much it says like 아리랑 아리랑, which I believe is a river, and then crossing over the Arirang Bridge or crossing over the Arirang Pass. It's interesting how they use the formal term to describe whoever this he is. So you can see there's already a disbalance in power. He who threw me away, he who abandoned me, he will not even be able to walk 4 kilometers, 심리, before his feet hurt or he hurts his feet. It's such like an expression of separation. It's an expression of there's nothing I can do to follow you. You threw me away. We were not even on the same level of equality.
Yeah.
And I wish on you, it's not even wishing, it's just stating a fact that you will face injury because of what you have done or where you're going.
Yeah.
But there's no sense of revenge, you know, there's no sense of begrudging you. It's just, that's just the fact. That's just what it is and how we live in this suffering and sorrow. So even in Arirang, which everyone knows the lyrics of Arirang and we sing it regularly, even Arirang itself has deep-seated Han inside of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. So, I mean, you have the traditional, but I also thought about how it's expressed in modern day art forms, namely music, right? Because Korea, as many of you who are listening knows, we kill the ballad game, you know?
Oh, Korea.
Yeah. So we have a lot of great ballads and a good handful of them are very sad.
Yes.
Very depressing.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that is just one modern way of maybe expressing this thing, Han. You know what I mean? And whether it's a conscious expression of that or just subconscious, which I think it tends to be subconscious
I
because
agree.
it's deep rooted within
Yeah.
the society and the mindset. I think that's something that happens frequently.
Yeah.
So I think that's an expression in the modern day.
I totally agree with you, and I'm so happy you brought that up. Goodness, what a segue. You must have been reading my mind because
I
there
tried
was
to.
another song I wanted to pull up to show the modern contextualization of Han. So arirang is old traditional. What about today modern song?
Yeah.
So anybody who is listening to Korean ballads or K-pop may know of the group Urban Zakapa. You know Urban Zacapa?
I don't think I've heard of them.
You've probably heard their music, but they did this song called 널 사랑하지 않아. You know that ballad?
I don't think so.
Oh my gosh, it's so like the first time I heard this song, I remember crying because of how incredibly sad it is. I believe it is one of like the saddest Korean ballads ever written. It's fairly modern. So I wanted to show you, of course, not all the lyrics, but just to express in this modern contextualizing of Han.
Right.
So 널 사랑하지 않아 means I don't love you. Just simply, I don't love you. And so it starts out with, what can I say? From where can I start? How? And then when it hits the chorus, it's saying, I don't love you. And you might know it too. But seeing your tears doesn't move my heart at all. Like, and in the end, it's just, I just don't love you. There's no reason. I can't say sorry. I don't even ask for forgiveness. I don't want to. And the whole song, though, is so bitterly sad. You can see the singer does still love the person to whom they are singing.
Right.
Yet the words are expressing strong indifference. But it's at odds with how incredibly sad they really are.
Right.
So for some reason, they can't be together. I'm getting emotional just thinking about it because I saw the music video and I was like, how could you do that? But there's no dramatic thing. You know, there's no effect that made this person, you know, sad or hate you or break it off. It's just, that is just how it is.
Right. You know, that actually reminds me of the song that you wrote recently that we did together. It Could Be Nice.
Oh,
Wow, you've got some Han
I've got
in
some
you.
Han inside of me.
And that was almost the exact same thing.
Oh yeah, how did the lyrics
To
go
give a
again?
little context, it was about a girl who really liked the guy, but felt like couldn't be with the guy.
Yeah.
But it could be nice if you could be. I mean,
Yeah.
you wrote that song. right?
Wow. Oh my gosh. Guys, I have so much Han in my heart.
It's so funny.
Well, something about Han that I find very interesting to Korea, because like we said before, many other countries and groups of people have experienced incredible injustices, and I think we're going to touch a little bit on that subject. But before moving over to that, I wanted to show another example. So you know, in North Korea, when Kim Jong-il died,
Yeah.
this was such a I think a bizarre thing for many Westerners to see. Seeing the North Korean people crying, I mean, positively screaming in their sorrow. And it was all over TV. They broadcast it
Right.
as they were crying at the leader's funeral when he died.
Right.
And it's so like, oh, how the people, how they loved our supreme leader so much. Look at them crying in sorrow over his passing. So some people might have seen them crying and say like, ah, that's theatrics. They had to do it. And who knows? Maybe on one hand, they just really loved the supreme leader, Kim Jong-il. Maybe they really loved him. Maybe on the other hand, it's all an act because they know they have to put an act on or they or their family will be in harm. Or another theory is this was really an expression, collective sorrow and bitterness. There are Han inside of them. They cannot do anything. There's nothing they can say or do to protect their family or themselves in that instance. And maybe they recognize they are living in such an oppressive regime, but they are helpless in that.
Yeah.
And they know there will be no change. So maybe that is why the people were crying. And it was a very collective thing too.
Right.
So I felt like that was a very not good, but exact example of Han in the
Sure.
modern day.
Yeah, being expressed. Yeah, that was
Right.
a very weird thing to see.
It can feel very weird, right?
Yeah, but like again, if it's, you know, it's hard to put yourself in, you know, or it's hard to judge
Yeah.
something without being in those shoes.
Yeah.
You know, and just experiencing those emotions.
Yeah.
Whatever those emotions are, wherever they come from, whether it's from Han or whether it's from just, you know, trying not to get hurt or caught or yeah, it's interesting.
Han is tracked throughout Korean history. Yes, through the many years, but I think I mentioned this earlier. I think it was primarily during Japanese occupation. Like in the 1920s, it was officially written down, and some people trace it back to this Japanese poet and Japanese art critic, Yanagi Soetsu. Did you read about him by any chance?
Very little, no.
Yeah, he just popped
Yeah,
up in some of
yeah.
the articles. Depending on who you ask, some people will say like, oh, he's just imperialistic Japanese and, he's a critic of Korean people, doesn't fully understand. One side. Other side of people say he really fully understood the Korean heart. So, of course, he can be controversial depending on who you ask. But he was a Japanese art critic in the 1920s and 1930s. And when he witnessed the oppression happening to the Korean people, by imperialistic Japan.
Yeah.
He wrote, I think it was a book where it loosely translates to Beauty of Sorrow, where he was expressing sympathy and admiration for the Korean people and the difficulties that they are going through. And I don't have the exact quotes, but it's pretty much defining Han in this case. So this is kind of where the word maybe became more contemporary. I would say. And then following that, lots of poets and people would write about it, like the poet Goun. Goun is also a very famous poet. He wrote loosely, "We Koreans were born from the womb of Han and brought up in the womb of Han." So that then ties this political aspect into almost like a biological aspect.
Right. And that is something that is very interesting. And I cannot remember where I read this or saw this, but I feel like recently, within the past 6 months, I was watching something because I'm a nerd at heart with certain things. I get in a zone like with YouTube where I just look up random things because I want to learn about it. So I'm, subscribed to a lot of these channels that just, I don't know, it talks about science or just random stuff just to learn.
Hey, all you scientists out there, he just called you a nerd.
I mean, I mean, we gotta stick together, man. So, no, but yeah, I remember, again, I don't have the context of this, but it was something to do with the hereditary nature of passing down trauma. Yeah. And so I was thinking about this when I was reading about Han and just, just sort of wondering how much is really at play because, science has only gone so far, especially with when it comes to genetics, to find out exactly what comes into play and how genetically, whether it's the experiences of your ancestors or like your parents, how much of that or the result of whatever happened to your parents, how much of that is passed down, written into your actual DNA. And so I have to wonder if that is something that happens or comes into play with Han. Because Korean people, a lot of people think that Han is just exclusive to Korean blood, basically. So this is something that's special. I don't mean like great special, good special, but something special to Korean people that is passed down. Like from the womb. And I just have to wonder if there is a scientific and biological aspect to it.
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, because think about it, a lot of people oftentimes seem to inherit traits from their parents that, may not be positive.
Yeah, like we think about, for example, alcoholism. Say maybe your father was an alcoholic, they will say, hey, there's a likelihood that you might be inclined to drinking alcohol like your alcoholic father, right? This is, of course, I can't really back this up off the top of my head, but this is an example. And so, I mean, it could be possible that traits, such traumatic traits or things that come out, like maybe something that I would grow up listening was the genealogic curse. Like a family curse.
Genealogical curse,
right? So some people say like, oh, you have to break that curse, right? And it sounds kind of like, oh, hocus pocus, but perhaps there's something in it. Maybe really in the genetics, these traits are carried through. And when you don't have this resolve, Han is like unresolved injustice, unresolved ironies, unresolved sense of this wasn't fair. And if you carry that inside you and internalize it, I mean, who knows, maybe literally it is passed down to the Korean blood.
Right. So that is something to think about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now I wanted to bring this statement up, and maybe some of our Korean listeners might not be totally thrilled, because if they consider Han as some kind of sorrowful badge of honor, which maybe some people do. But personally, I also believe Han, maybe not in the same exact way, can manifest itself in other people groups.
Sure.
So like I was listening to this YouTube channel where they're trying to explain Han, and they made the point that Jewish people also have Han. to
Right.
some sense.
Right.
And if you look at, yes, the history of Jewish people, not only just the religion, but the actual people group, right? We can definitely say on a global scale, they have experienced trauma in their history.
Absolutely.
And so perhaps Han is seen there as well.
Right. Of course, within when I think of African Americans,
Yeah.
a lot of, and not just exclusive to African Americans, but a majority of African Americans, but also other blacks who have the history of slavery in their ancestry.
Yeah.
A lot of that, the Han seems to be manifested in a lot of us African Americans too.
I totally agree.
It just seems like the symptoms that we've been, just talking about with Han seems to be this very similar with the African American community. It just kind of manifests in a different way. But man, just the decades and, well, not decades, the centuries of turmoil that has been sort of passed down from generation to generation all the way up until modern day. I mean, just the trauma and the civil unrest and just the day-to-day living that African Americans have to face.
Right.
Like, it's very similar, like that unrest. Like, that's why a lot of times, and I don't want to speak for all African Americans or all black people, of course, but a lot of times that's why black people are very impatient with whenever things happen or situations happen. When there is something like a blackface incident that happens, like was recently, I guess, the talk or the buzz here in Korea again. Yeah, it's just an automatic like anger or disappointment or extreme heartache because there's that reminder. So I feel like that's sort of like Han as well.
I really, really agree. I mean, it didn't come to my mind until I was researching it. And the one point where it hit me was music expression. That was where I first made the connection. Because here we have pansori, arirang, now in Korean ballads, poetry. So much Han is expressed, this grief in our songs. And I was thinking, well, wait a minute. What about like spirituals? Right? Spirituals, then turning into jazz, turning into blues,
yeah.
turning into hip hop. This also to me is, whoa, it's a manifestation of Han.
Yeah, totally. I mean, by definition, if we could say that we translated it correctly, which is almost impossible, but yeah, I think that is the same thing, honestly. Yeah. It's just reflected in a different people group, a different culture.
Yeah. And I wish there was a way that we are, well, not I wish. Let's put it this way. I think by understanding more on these cultural concepts and history of different countries and nations and people groups, we will find we don't have so many separating factors between us. And when you feel a sense of, what's the word in English? It's not like intimacy, but a sense of closeness,
right.
Familiarity.
Yeah.
Suddenly it becomes that much harder to hate you
right.
for where you are from or what you look like. So discussing things like Han and discussing hardships and discussing these very sad, unresolved historical issues that may be carried on literally, physically through the generations,
right.
can ultimately lead, I believe, to understanding, compassion, and ultimately healing. So we won't have these separations between people or this hatred or dislike because I don't understand you.
That's very good.
So
very
I'm so glad
point.
that we can talk about this because I never made this connection that Han could be represented in other places as well.
Right. Totally agree with you. And one of the things that I was thinking about when we think about this manifestation of Han or how it manifests, it's not always a seemingly negative manifestation, right? It doesn't always have to be these sad songs or tears, even
or
though
angry outbursts.
Right, because even though internally it is this resentment or this unresolved like anger type of thing, but it can also manifest in different ways. And we've seen that in Korean society. Think about it. Korea just 100 years ago was under Japanese occupation. I had to do the math in my head. And then just decades after that was in the Korean War. And from that point, I mean, think about what has happened in just a matter of decades. It became its own independent nation. And
We had our dictatorship, but then fought for democracy.
exactly. And then built up from a third world country, one of the poorest in the world at the
Yeah.
time, to one of the richest in just a matter of years. And so I think that that feeling or that sense of Han was a big driving factor in that, because it's almost like I'm thinking about how people sometimes, like, for example, you're in a relationship with a girlfriend who dumps you, right? And she goes out with another dude, and that hurts you and that makes you angry. What do you want to do? Let's just say you're like, forget that. I'm going to go on Tinder and I'm going to find me a hotter girl and go on a date with her and then flaunt it on my social media so that I can prove
Yeah.
that you don't have the best of me. I got the best of you and I got something better and I did something better, even though realistically
It's not
inside.
resolved in your
No,
heart.
no, it's
Yeah.
you're doing it with I guess you could say a wrong motivation.
Yeah.
It's something like that. And I feel like because Korea was so, I guess, on the bottom on the world stage, because of that Han and because of everything that's happened to them. Think about it. I mean, country after country over centuries have kept invading Korea, and Korea never did anything. Korea was a very peaceful nation, just minding their own business. And I think after a while, after the Korean War, they were like, you know what? We're going to really build ourselves back up. We're going to build this country back up. And we're going to show the world that we can be the best, that we can be a top player. And I feel like that was one of the motivating factors for these conglomerates to come up and to really take over the world stage. Samsung, LG. I mean, we're just throwing out all these brands out here. You know what I mean? Kia.
If you're listening, send us cars, please.
Yeah, for sure. And we see that a lot of good has come out of it, but I think inside there's still that unresolved, I guess, anger or just this unresolved
Sure.
motivation. I don't know what to call it. And I feel like that's why even still Korea overall is not a happy nation. I think people have moments of happiness, of course, and they can say they have happy lives because they have everything that they need. But I think overall, on the happiness scale, if we were able to measure it amongst all these different countries and cultures, I think for Korea, it would be lower than many
Right.
developed countries
Yeah.
because of the fact that they still have this unresolved something on the inside that leads them and drives them to accomplish many great things, but they also do that at the expense of other Koreans. So this sort of country is like, and I'm not speaking bad about Korea, so please don't misconstrue my words, but that's why a lot of times Koreans are one-upping each other and just sort of dog meets dog and just sort of fighting each other out to be the best, to be the top, to be the smartest, the most educated, to be the top of the company. And I think a lot of that is influenced by Han.
I think that is a great observation.
Yeah.
And I totally agree with you that you are somewhat of a nerd.
No, I just think about these things, and I can be
Just kidding. That
a
was
little
really
wrong,
wonderful.
but that's just
Yeah.
that's the feeling I get.
I really, really agree with you. I don't ever get a sense that people in Korea are working hard for success because their own happiness, or they feel
yeah.
like, wow, this is something I really want to do and I'll get a great
Yes.
sense of personal satisfaction if I achieve it. I almost never ever hear that. It
Right.
is almost always some outside pressure. It is maybe because my parents sacrificed so much for me. How can I disappoint them? I mean, those in itself are very strong motivating factors.
Yeah.
And I do think they are remnants, echoes, or maybe even fresh examples of Han that's existing in the modern sense too. When I was looking at those street interviews, because there's not many videos, for example, on YouTube talking about Han, there was a Korean YouTuber who was, of course, doing the street interviews with Korean people asking about Han. And many of the younger people were saying, to be honest, I don't know if I myself have personally experienced Han. Or can I say I understand it on the same level as my grandparents? I don't know. So who is to say that Han is going to exist 100 years from now? Who
Right.
knows? But we can definitely say it has a place today in modern Korean society. Now, how about you? Have you ever personally, do you think personally you have felt Han or experienced it?
I think so in some ways. I feel like in a lot of my relationships, we're entering into a therapy session now, but a lot of my
You
relationships.
can lay down on the couch if you'd like.
Yeah, like a lot of my relationships in the past, like close friendships and even with significant others in the past, like have many of them have ended in a lot of disappointment for me. And I don't want to play the victim. I never like to play the victim. But the honest truth is, I was disappointed in either how they handled the relationship or the fact that they maybe weren't as loyal as I was as loyal to them. And I feel like that has affected how I treat relationships today. And I'm very standoffish until I know that I can trust you. And I only have a few. Like, you know, I don't like to be friends with everybody. I think innately just with my personality, I want to trust people, but because I've been hurt so many times, I just have this sense of, man, it's just not fair, you know? So what am I going to do about that? I'm just going to, you know, be very selective with who I hang out with. And I'm going to make sure that they sort of pass my personal tests of this person's good enough to be my friend.
Yeah.
Not good enough as a person, but just like, I feel like I can trust them. So I feel like that. And also the fact that, you know, economically, I want to get ahead. And I really, like, I've had down moments, but I've had up moments, but a lot of down moments economically with business and trying out so many different things. And I felt like
It's a constant frustration.
it's a constant frustration. And you've seen manifestations of it.
I
You know,
have.
that's one of the
Yeah,
biggest
when you
things
come
that
and
I've
sing on your piano and you're like,
I
I don't
know.
have enough money. Yeah, I've heard it before. Yeah.
Yes, and secrets out. But I think those are things that I deal with, and those are very important for me, and they're very strong. And again, like to be serious, like you've seen those things in me.
I will agree that I think that is a seed of Han in you that I've seen, because it's, to me, the way it affects you is not a normal just like, man, I wish life wouldn't just keep beating me down. Oh well, gotta keep moving forward. It's deeper than that when it comes to you.
I mean, you've seen me cry because of this.
More than me.
Yes. Why am I saying this? I don't know.
Guys, please send some sympathy letters.
Yeah, but this is something that is really just, I can't describe it, but it is that internal feeling and just that, you know, frustration. But I don't think I have it to the extent that many people experience it here, having grown up in Korea.
Yeah.
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 What about you?
Oh, thank you for being so vulnerable.
Oh, man.
For me, so I think I grew up witnessing Han a lot with my mom, and obviously I'm not gonna, you know, lay everything out here.
Right.
But we have lived our family separated from my mom's immediate family, right? So like my grandmother or my grandfather who passed away when I was very young, all her brothers and sisters, all my cousins, people who are her loved family. We were in the US. And so I witnessed almost daily this intense sadness, grief, almost self-hatred that I chose to live here instead of with them. But at this point, it's almost like I've gone too far. Look at me, I'm married, I have a family. Oh, I have a house. I worked so hard to make it in the US. But my family, I think my mom had a sense of I abandoned them. And there was nothing that could be done, especially at that time. Couldn't call people easily. If you write a letter, who's to say we'll reach them on time? And while part of my family would be struggling or suffering, there was nothing my mom could do. And instead, I think she felt also a sense of disgust with herself that I'm being so, look at me living my rich American life.
Right.
And I couldn't do anything for my Korean family. So I witnessed this on a very daily basis. And so it became very normalized to me, this sense of separation. And so even today, I am still living with that, I would say, trauma. You know, with seeing that. If you have never seen somebody so heartbroken until families are ripped apart by nothing that you could do, it's out of your hands. That to me is an example of Han. And I feel that very intensely. It kind of like dictates quite a lot of what I do.
Sure.
You know, my feeling, am I being like Korean Han also? My desire to succeed is never to make money for myself.
Yeah.
Ever. You know, I'm practically throwing money on the street at people. My desire to succeed is to make a name for my mother and for my Korean family, to say like, I worked very hard so that you guys don't have to feel separated from us. I worked very hard, or I want to one day be so successful that my mom, hey, I'll get you a plane ticket now. Or you can stay here. I built a house for you. So your family will be all together, right? So I think this Han is very internalized in myself. And to be honest, like until I came to live in Korea full time and was exploring more of Han, there was no real term to express that. And it's very hard to talk about it with people who don't understand that feeling. So in a way, you get a sense of like relief when you express Han to people who fully also understand it.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of, well, not a lot, but I've read about a couple of Korean adoptees or Korean Americans that have experienced that, and they didn't know what the feeling was until they came back to the motherland, maybe for the first time, or when they were older enough to be able to understand that concept, and they finally realize, oh, that is what I've been feeling my whole life. It's just that concept of Han. Yeah. And that's very interesting to especially with Korean adoptees who maybe had to deal with the emotions of, their parents giving them up for adoption for whatever reason, and coming back and just realizing maybe, that was all linked to those feelings. Yeah.
Yeah, I will say Han has been a very powerful factor in Korean society, and many Korean people also in the Korean diaspora, whether they grew up in Korea or not. So we're going to wrap up the episode here. And thank you guys for writing in listener mail. We're going to read you some mail next week, so be sure to tune in then. And in the meanwhile, if you have your own example of Han in your life, or how would you describe Han for yourself? Have you witnessed Han? And do you think this is important? What do you think this means maybe to you personally? We would love to know. So if you're listening to this podcast, you can write in at thehalfieproject@gmail.com, or if you're watching this podcast on YouTube, leave a comment below. We'll be very, very curious to see what discussion comes out of Han. So that being said, I think we're going to wrap it up here. Anything else you'd like to mention?
That's it. I think we covered everything that we could. I just want to say that if you are interested in learning about other people and trying to understand them, I think having this in the back of your mind would maybe help you to realize maybe this is why this person is acting this way or reacts this way. And so just as an encouragement, this is something that I'm challenging myself to do, is to just really try to find out what that something is, through conversation and dialogue and spending time with that person in order to have a deeper understanding of who they are or the culture they represent. So maybe that can be just an encouraging word for anyone out there. That's something that I plan to do myself. That's
very good. Thank you, Dr. C. All right. Well, that's it. Guys, thanks so much for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast anywhere you listen to it. Leave a nice review and tune in next week. We are the Halfie Project.